that it comes from the east. And tin and textiles are then taken to Kanesh in Anatolia, and they circulate those tin and textiles in local markets for silver and gold, which they take back to Assyria. Here again is our map of the mound, the archaeological site of Kanesh, with the palace in the center and the neighborhoods here depicted. And the various colors here, since we have tablets that we can read, we know the ethnic identifications of people in the neighborhoods who were writing on tablets. And the Assyrians were only part of the inhabitants. They lived next door to Anatolians of various sorts. So let me summarize those comments. The Karo, which is the association of merchants, it's not a place, it's a sociological term, lived in Kanesh, which is a very large place. It's probably 4 kilometers in diameter, and there may have been a population as many as 20 to 30,000. Here again is a little map of the ethnicities in the lower town. So Assyrians were not the only people who lived there, they lived next to the local population. These locals have following linguistic or ethno-linguistic identifications. There are Hattians, Hittites, Luwians, Hurrians, and others. And as I've been saying, because this is a fairly new product of research, that the Karam was not a colony. It was not a place at all. It was where Assyrians lived and had their own councils and settled disputes significantly among these merchants. Assyrians were entrepreneurs. They formed their own family firms, contracting with some other people. There were middlemen in long-distance trade. There was risk. There was knowledge of how to move goods. And this system existed in a very decentralized political environment in West Asia. Now, also, the Assyrians lived 3 generations outside their native lands, and they had second wives among the Anatolians. There were local temples, and this local institution, the Karum, as I've been saying, settled disputes among the merchants who were concerned with all the economic activities and credit institutions with which they were able to trade. Assyrians in the homeland, Ashur, were not disinterested in this trade. They made treaties with neighboring polities so that the traders could move. But the Assyrian government did not organize the trade. In the international arena, there are a variety of city-states and territories. There are no large territorial states. So small-scale alliances and treaties had to be made in order to avoid conflict. So here is a map showing the decentralized nature of this old Assyrian trade. Each one of these colors indicates a local social organization. Well, what happened in the 18th and 17th centuries to cause the end of the old Assyrian trade? Here again is a notion of interlocking circuits. So there were traders who could move within these various circuits, which were small-scale political enterprises. Well, what happened at the end of the 18th, early 17th centuries were that large political systems were forming. Hittites in Anatolia, Babylonians in southern Mesopotamia, and the trade depended on the traders' access across large amounts of territory, which were then essentially prevented by the establishment of political, large-scale territorial regimes. Let's look at a couple of other trading systems as well and ask ourselves about what similarities and differences there were to the Mesopotamians. First, Central and East Asian trade, then a European example of trade. Now here are some maps I've got from the Chinese archaeologist Li Min at UCLA, who amends those maps of the extent of the silk routes before silk. It didn't stop in Central and South Asia and early China, but they also moved all the way through China in these various interaction spheres. And here is another map of Li Min showing that the trade from Inner Asia and all the way to the central plains of China. And he has very good evidence. How many traders did it take to move goods? Here is a fibula, a brooch, from about the 8th century AD from Europe in the Rhine region, France, Germany, and extending into lower Scandinavia. Now, note in this brooch, this is after Rome and after Charlemagne, there are varieties of colored stones, but in fact most of those stones are glass. The Romans were great producers of glass, except the red stones, which they couldn't make glass out of and were in fact garnets, semi-precious stones. Garnets, physical testing has shown in those brooches, come from India. There were hundreds of these brooches found in funerary deposits in Europe. And I asked a scholar at the Roman Museum in Cologne about how many garnets, in fact, came from India to Germany and France and Scandinavia in this Merovingian period. Well, there were hundreds of brooches found, but the number of brooches is not what you want to know. You want to know the weight of the garnets. If you added up all the garnets that were part of this trade, the answer is 3 kilograms. One person from India might have taken those garnets which were so prized by those Europeans in this period. One more example of trade. This is from the American Southwest. In the 9th century AD, basically, a lot of goods came from Mesoamerica into the Southwest. Mesoamerica is the southern Mexico, Guatemala region. And significant among those goods, which archaeologists can identify very quickly, are macaws, parrots, that are indigenous to Mesoamerica. And what the Indians of the Southwest wanted literally brightly colored feathers for use in costumes and in rituals. And we find dozens of macaw burials, the bones of the macaws, in southwestern sites. And more recently, we know about cacao beakers. Now here's a map of the extent of this trade. There is southern Mexico and neighboring countries, and here is the Southwest. A lot of these Mesoamerican goods were found at this, one of the most important sites called Chaco Canyon. But here, let me just point out that there's another culture called Mimbres here, right on the border of Mexico and New Mexico, that I'm going to talk about. Here are beakers that have been known about for many years, but only very recently has it been noticed that these cylinder jars, through chemical tests, residue analysis, contain cocoa. And these jars, which come from this Chaco Canyon, the Southwest, have exactly the same shape as cacao jars well known from the Maya region, where they were used in ceremonies, religious rites, where they drank cocoa. All these jars are made with local clays, so they weren't bringing the jars, but they were bringing the cacao to the Southwest. So here it is, a bit of a comparison and also a speculation. From Ashur to Kanish is about 1,000 kilometers across mountains and various kinds of rivers. From Mexico City to New Mexico is about 2,000 or more kilometers. But the Assyrians transported via donkeys, which in the New World did not exist. There are no draft animals domesticated in the New World. The Assyrians took about 6 weeks to get from Ashur to Kadesh. They had to pay taxes to local hostile chieftains. Mesoamerican transport was on foot, carrying cacao beans and macaws, and it was partly transported by sea along the coast of Mexico. But what happened? Why was suddenly in the 9th century AD this trade of parrots and of cacao, and also copper bells, among other things? Well, in the 9th century AD, Maya cities collapsed. They were abandoned after centuries of prosperity, and we have to ask, what happened to the people in these cities that were essentially abandoned and depopulated? Who moved those goods, macaws and cacao beans, to the north? Well, the answers comes from that Mimbres culture on the border of New Mexico and Mexico. This is a humble village culture, but some of the greatest art in the American Southwest and the Northwest of Mexico comes from these humble Mimbres villages. This pottery was mainly found in mortuary deposits. Let me show you some of the images in these pots. Now you'll note in the upper left-hand portion, we see a stylized monkey. There are no monkeys in the American Southwest. It's from Mesoamerica, and he's playing with some parrots. How is these parrots transported? Here is a Mimbres pot with one guy in a basket carrying a baby macaw. So we need to try to explain why at this particular time parrots and cacao beans came to the American Southwest. One possible answer is that refugees from the collapse of Maya cities came to the American Southwest, Mexican Northwest. There was contact between Mesoamerica and the American Southwest for several thousand years before the 9th century. Maize, the staple crop in the American Southwest, comes from Mesoamerica. And it first appears in Mesoamerica, in the American Southwest, about 2000 BC. So people in Mesoamerica knew about the Southwest, and people in the Southwest knew about Mesoamerica for a very long time. Maybe at the collapse of the Maya civilization, collapse is a loaded word here, but let's move on. Some refugees brought these goods to the American Southwest. Well, we have some other possible examples of refugees establishing trading connections. First, there is in southern Mesopotamia a speculation that at the end of the Uruk period, the period of the evolution of the first cities in Mesopotamia, there were refugees who left that southern Mesopotamia area, moved to Syria, Anatolia, and also Iran. And we know, perhaps more securely, that Greek refugees at the end of the second millennium BC, around 1200 BC, moved from the Aegean or Anatolia to the southern Levant. Let's look at these movements. There is Uruk and possible outmigration of Urukians throughout Western Asia. And here is a map of Greeks, essentially, who lived on the coast of Turkey, Anatolia, moving down to the Gaza area in the southern Levant, into that area of red. We call them Philistines, as their name is in the Bible, but in fact their pottery is pure Greek. So, tested your patience. Let me try some conclusions. First, traders are not employees of the state. They are not completely separate from political institutions, since kings and rulers want to make trade possible. But it's traders who are self-organized. The state profits from trade and enables trade. And we know that trade is the lifeblood of certain economies. Next, these trading relations, as I have shown you, are played out over very large regions. The traders are not part of the state, bring cultures together as they bring goods from one place to another. Trade existed deep into prehistory. They did not have to wait for cities to have trade. And early forms of social and economic stratification were most likely connected to trading activities. Some cities, as we've talked about, Genoa, Ashur, Cancuan, were dominated by traders. Trade made money, and traders were entrepreneurs. States taxed traders and created some of the means for trade. Trade is not just about economics. It's not epiphenomenal in cultural terms. Trade is about the engagement of peoples, and traders are the bearers of genes, diseases, and new religions. Trade is central as to how cultural systems were transferred to distant lands. It's not enough for archaeologists to document the movement of goods. We must ask, who moved the goods? How did such movement affect both home and distant societies? Trade is not just one thing. It's a point of entry into the investigation of how cities and states evolved, how the world came to be what it is now. Thank you.
네, 잘 들으셨죠?
김영환 선생님이 한 2, 3분 정도라도
네.
요약을 하면
요약, 예. 저희 김영환 선생님께서 잠깐 요약해 주시죠.
하시고 질문이세요.
네. 잠깐 앉아.
워낙 방대한 내용이고 그리고 영어로 사실 한 시간 내국어로 한 시간 정도 강의를 듣는다는 게 좀 피로감이 상당하거든요 사실. 그래서 저도 지금 중국에서 공부하고 있지만 느낌을 잘 알고 있습니다. 그래서 한번 제가 이제 워낙 방대한 내용이라서 제가 모든 것을 다 요약할 수 없지만 핵심을 얘기를 하자면 일종의 거대한 도전이라고 할 수 있는데요. 그 여러 이제 사회학자들 혹은 이제 역사학자들 아주 유명했던 그리고 19세기와 20세기를 선도했던 막스 웨버라든지 칼플란이라든지 혹은 이제 우리나라에서 잘 알려지지 않지만 그래도 이제 모스 스탠리 같은 이제 유명한 로마사가 같은 사람들에게 이제 도전을 하는 교역이 과연 무엇인가 그리고 고대에는 도대체 경제가 어떻게 움직였는가라는 것에서 이제 이런 교역을 통해서 그런 기존의 학설에 도전을 한다는 데서 큰 의의가 있다라고 볼 수 있겠습니다. 그래서 이제 그런 이제 여러 이제 사회학자들 혹은 이제 로마 사가들은 교역의 어떤 그 고대 교역의 기초 그리고 고대 경제의 기초는 국가였다라고 보는 게 이제 지배적이었는데 그것이 아니라 훨씬 더 자발적이고 민간의 어떤 힘이 훨씬 더 중요하게 작용했다라고 이제 이 선생님의 연구를 통해서 그리고 여러 가지 비교 여러 지역에 있는 어떤 실질적인 사례들을 이제 가지고 분석을 하신 겁니다. 그래서 교역이 또 국가의 경제적 기초 그리고 국가라는 어떤 정치체뿐만 아니라 그 국가 내에 살고 있는 사람들의 어떤 경제적인 기초를 이루었다라는 말씀을 해주셨고 또 여러분들이 여러 가지 여기 수치로 통해서 보셨듯이 굉장히 광범위한 지역을 통한 어떤 이동 현대와 견주어도 지금 오늘날과 견주어도 이제 전혀 짧은 거리가 한 2,250km 혹은 1,000km 이상의 거리를 이제 이동을 하면서 심지어 이제 신대륙 같은 경우는 도보로 사실 그 거리를 이동을 해야 되기 때문에 그런 상당히 고대교역의 어떤 위대한 점도 이제 볼 수 있었고요. 또 교역은 이제 아주 오래되었고 심지어 도시라는 것이 이제 발생하기 이전부터 이제 인간은 교역 혹은 교환을 이제 진행을 해왔습니다. 그리고 그 교역은 이후에 어떤 사회 경제적 어떤 계층화에도 상당한 영향을 미치게 되었고 이제 사회가 이제 그 다음 단계로 나아가는 어떤 발전하게 되는 그런 어떤 원동력이 되기도 했습니다. 또 한 가지 또 말씀해 주신 거는 이제 여기서도 나오지만 교육이라는 건 단순한 것이 아니고 또 이제 경제적인 활동뿐만이 아니라 정말 사람들 간의 어떤 인터랙션 그러니까 어떤 상호작용이라고 해야 되나요? 그런 사람과 사람이 이제 만나는 것이 사람과 물자와 물자가 만나는 것이 아니고 정말 사람을 이제 보려고 하는, 그리고 그 사람들이 이동함으로써 어떤 효과가 있는가라고 했을 때 선생님이 신고고학이라는 이제 processual archaeology라는 new archaeology, 더 이상 사실 신고고학은 아니거든요. 사실 그 미국 쪽에서는 또 post processual archaeology라고 해서 더 이제 그 뒤에 이제 그 고고학도 나오고 지금 또 고고학이 계속 발전하고 있는데 다른 방향으로 그 당시 이제 그 당시에 쓴 신고고학자들은 그 이제 문화는 그 지역의 어떤 그 환경에 적응이 아주 중요했다라고 보는데 반면 사실 선생님께서는 이런 교역이 어떤 문화적인 이제 전파를 통해서 아이디어를 이제 한쪽 지역에서 다른 지역으로 이동을 시킨다든지 이런 부분 가지고 이제 강조를 하면서 상당히 거대한 도전을 한다고 볼 수 있겠습니다. 그리고 또한 이제 사람을 강조하는 만큼 이 고고학이 이제 앞으로 지향하게 될 것은 사실 고고학자들은 대체적으로 발굴을 하게 되면 이제 여러 가지 이제 object, 이제 그 실질적인 그 물체를 가지고 이제 탐구를 하는 학문이기 때문에 그 물체에 집중할 가능성이 많지만 그 유물에 이제 그 집중할 가능성이 많지만 그 유물보다 그 유물 뒤에 이제 숨어 있는 그 사람들 간의 어떤 상호작용 가지고 읽어낼 필요가 있다. 이것이 아주 중요하다라고 이제 이렇게 요약하고 질문을 하겠습니다.
네, 제가 들은 강연 중에 제일 조용했던 강연이었으니까 하나도 빼먹지 않고 들으려고 이제 선생님들이 조용히 집중해 주셨는데요. 조금 쉽게 잘 안 들리고 해서 지나친 것도 있고 한데 자유롭게 혹시 궁금한 부분 있으시면 질문해 주시기 바랍니다.
저기 아주 강의를 잘 들었습니다. 그런데 그 굉장히 멀리 떨어진 그 거리에 서로 그 교육을 함에 있어서 그 지역과 지역 간에 서로 그 신용이 있기 때문에 그 트레이드가 이제 성사될 텐데 그 중간에 바이어와 셀러 사이에 피치 못할 사정으로 그 어떤 차질이 생겼을 때 그 보상이라든가 현대적인 그 어떤 그 보험이라든가 그런 거에 대한 그 흔적을 그 발굴해서 발견할 수 있었는지 어떤 기록이나 어떤 그런 거로 할 수 있었는지 그게 궁금해졌습니다. 네.
So what she asked was, these trades are in between the two very distant regions, most of these trades, and so fidelity is the foundation of these two trades. But whenever something went wrong, then were there any traces that you can find from, for example, these documents for insurance or reimbursements, or what happened that when trade went wrong, what could be done from those? Do you have any?
You're absolutely right. Trade is a risky business. Okay. Trade is a risky business, and if you can make a lot of profit, there is also the chance that there will be a very great loss. There were various partnerships covering, in one notable example in the old Assyrian trade, over 30 years of trading, where
그래서 이제 교역은 상당한 리스크를 동반하는 것은 분명하고 상당한 리스크를 동반하는 것은 분명합니다. 네. 그리고 이제 제가 지금 버퍼링 좀 걸려서 죄송합니다. 그 아시리아 같은 Assyria,
Yeah.
그 파트너십 같은 경우에 이제 그 발견이 되는데 특히 이제 30년 정도 가는 이제 파트너십이 발견이 되는데
So these 30-year contracts required various investors to participate in the entire venture. And as I read a little bit from these old Assyrian letters, there were difficulties. People did not pay what they were supposed to pay. And there were courts in the Karam of Kanesh which tried to adjudicate things that had gone wrong. Lack of payments when they were due, and losses that were incurred in the trade. So if there were profits, there were also losses, and they attempted to mitigate those losses, but sometimes they had to go to court to get their money back.
그래서 이제 이런 30년간의 어떤 그 계약이 보이기도 하는데요. 그 이제 아시리아의 고아시아의 교역을 중에서는 여기에서는 이제 여러 이제 예를 들어서 이제 그 리스크를 이제 줄이기 위해서 여러 투자자들의 이제 참여를 이끌어낸다든지, 그리고 이제 선생님이 아까 보여주셨듯이 그 편지에서 보여주셨듯이 여러 가지 이제 어려움들이 이제 발견이 되잖아요. 그 편지에서도 예를 들면은 납부를 이제 은을 납부를 해야 되는데 제때 하지 않는다든지. 그래서 이런 것들을 이제 해결하기 위해서 이제 그 아나톨리아의 카룸이라는 곳, 카룸 카네시라는 곳에서는 그 이런 재판장이 있어서 그 재판에서 여러 가지 이제 분쟁을 해결할 수 있게 그런 이제 그런 협의체들이 있었고요. 그래서 선생님이 말씀하신 거는 교역 시에는 손실이 발생할 수도 있다. 그리고 이윤이 있으면 그 손실이 있을 수도 있다. 다만 이런 것들을 완화하기 위해서 카운터시라는 어떤 그 사회적인 협의체를 통해서 그리고 이제 재판 같은 걸 통해서 정 안 되면 정말 재판까지 가서 이제 이러한 그 분쟁들을 해결하고 교역에서부터 발생할 수 있는 손실을 최소화하는 그런 여러 가지 그 기구들, 기관들, 제도들이 정비하려는 노력들이 이제 보이고 있습니다.
I have the feeling that his answer was better than mine. I also want to remind you that this old Assyrian trading system, of which we know so much, covers about 150 years. And then it doesn't seem to exist any longer, at least in the form that we know it. We have, however, a sampling problem. In Mesopotamian history, which starts with written documents about 3200 BC, we don't know of this kind of system until about 1920.